Show. Tashan, how are you?
I'm good. How about yourself, man?
I'm doing great. I don't know that this surprised anyone, but I guess I'll ask you: Did the news yesterday of keeping Carr in the fold come at any kind of surprise to you?
Not at all. I think after the Devontae Adams trade was made, it was pretty much a formality that they were going to move ahead and make a commitment to Derek Carr. I was more so surprised by the structure of the deal. While it is a 3-year extension and overall it's like a massive deal, when you get to the details of it, it's mostly just a 1-year commitment in terms of the team has a window potentially after the Super Bowl next year to move on, theoretically, if they wanted to. He does have the no trade clause, but it was a much more team-friendly deal in general than I thought it would end up being.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to hear that then, too, because I've always felt Carr, to me, Deshaun, I don't know how you feel about him, is he's good. There's not a lot of flaws in his game, but to me, if you can upgrade, you always try to. I don't know how the Raiders do that. I don't think there's one young guy in the wings they can draft. Certainly there's better quarterbacks, but how do you get them? Is that kind of why they're maybe keeping this, hey, you're our guy, we like you, we'll do another year, and then we'll kind of evaluate?
Yeah, Carr is a guy, he's good enough to where, it's much more difficult to just get another one of him than people may realize. This draft class in particular, like, the quarterbacks, aren't that exciting. It doesn't seem like anybody from that group will be good enough, at least in the first year, to justify moving on from Carr. And they didn't have the draft capital probably to go get one of the guys anyway. And then free agency, good quarterbacks almost never hit free agency. The guys in trade, everybody had, Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson. Those things were never really realistic for the Raiders, guys that would be clear upgrades. And so it just wasn't a path for them to go out and get somebody that was clearly better or markedly better than Derek Carr. I would say he's like a top 12-ish quarterback. Those are hard to come by. And so, especially with the deal being so team-friendly, realistically, they aren't going to cut Carr or anything like that after the next season, no matter how the next season plays out. He has no trade clause, so if he doesn't want to get moved, he can pretty much nullify that. So, but even looking ahead, it's essentially a 2-year guarantee if they hold on to him, because in that third year they have a lot of flexibility to move on if they want to. And so you pretty much guarantee that you have a quarterback who has shown he can play at a top 10 level at times, even if he isn't maybe consistently 1 year in and year out. And they're banking on, what they surrounded him on the offense with Devontae Adams, and they already had Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, and defensively adding guys like Chandler Jones. They're banking on him. Maybe they don't win the Super Bowl because of Carr, but they clearly believe that they can win one with him. And so that's what they're aiming for. And when you already have a quarterback that good, there's no need to make things more difficult than they need to be.
Are there draft targets next week, mainly on the defensive side?
It's hard to say. I mean, they don't pick until midway through the third round. And so I think when you're in that range, and they're a team that most of their starting jobs are filled, the offensive line stands out as a weakness. But, when you're talking mid-third round and later, it's kind of hard to come across, the offensive lineman that can step in and start from day one. Most of those guys are going to be off the board, especially at tackle, which is their weakest spot is at right tackle. And so I think they're really going to take a best player available approach. They don't have many pressing needs, and when you get into those later stages of the draft anyway, those guys that are still on the board, they have some kind of hole in their game, or they're raw, they're not developed all the way, so you might as well just take the best player available and swing on upside. And so I would more so expect that to be their approach, more so than focusing in on offense or defense.
Tashan Reed joining us here from The Athletic, covers the Raiders. I think about the division. It was always pretty tough. It looks like it just got better, Raiders included. Look like there's a lot of improvement there, and some will just look right at the quarterback position. If you go Mahomes and Herbert and now Russell Wilson, Carr obviously is in that group and in that mix and can have his games. But people will look at it and go, well, maybe the Raiders, where do they fall in line in this division? But I think about last year, they go 10-7, they get that playoff spot. They went through probably more than just about any team all year and really competed with the Bengals in the playoffs. So I feel like they're better. Do you think they can be better, though, than 10-7?
They may not be, but they might be good enough to still make the playoffs. I think this division, there may be one of the teams that kind of stands ahead and has 12 or 13 wins, but I think it's going to be pretty close down the wire. The worst team in this division could theoretically have a win record. That's how good I think this division could be. And, as you said, the Chargers, Broncos, and Raiders all had good off seasons. You would say that the Chiefs took a step back just by nature of losing Tyreek Hill, but a step back from the AFC Championship game could still be pretty good, So, in terms of, do they win more games next season? They don't necessarily have to. I think it's more about, getting into the playoffs, but, being able to advance once they get there because, since they've had Carr, they made 2 playoff bursts, only one he was actually able to play in. But they haven't, gotten a playoff win in a long time. And so regardless of what seed they are, how many games they win, it's more so about being able to advance. And they feel that they'll be able to do so with the moves that they made this offseason. It's really hard to pick a clear front runner in that division. But, I don't think that should have precluded them from going for the division being tough. I mean, you look around. I mean, Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, those guys are probably going to be star quarterbacks for the next 10 years. So if you just say our division is good, we can't go for it, and when are you going to start competing, right? Just sitting and waiting around on those guys to suddenly not be good anymore. You're probably never going to break through. And so they had to go for it at some point, and they decided with the current makeup that they had that they were going to go for it now.
One of the big offseason moves is when you change the front office. I mean, that's pretty significant. Dave Ziegler comes in. He's already made pretty significant moves. What do you think of him? What do you think his impact will be on this team?
Yeah, they've taken a very calculated approach coming on board. It's a change, obviously, just because there's a new coach and a new GM, but also last time around, John Gruden had personnel power, and now this time, it lies in the hands of the GM and Dave Ziegler, and so that's a shift in philosophy and how they operate as an organization. And they had a pretty quiet start to free agency. They didn't really do much the first 2 days, and their fans were kind of freaking out, and then they signed Chandler Jones and traded for Devontae Adams, and then nothing's been the same since. And so, but the way that they've structured, even you look at Devontae and Carr, they basically have a 3-year commitment and a 3-year window with both of those guys. And Chandler Jones, they have a gap after the second year they can get out of it. And so the way they've been structuring their contracts, I would say they've done a pretty good job of maybe not always not as temptingly as Derek Carr's, but they've done a good job of making sure they don't, ruin their future books and maintain some flexibility in future years, just in case, it doesn't work out, with this 2 or 3 year run that they have here with Carr and Devontae Adams and some of these guys at the helm. And so they've done a good job, so far, at least on paper, of, setting themselves up to be able to compete right now without, maybe mortgaging their future and sacrificing down the line. And so we still have to see what happens when games are being played, but the Raiders, they feel like they've done enough, in terms of improving the team this offseason. And now it's up to the players, obviously, but from a broader standpoint, the coaching staff, in order to get them to where they need to go.
Yeah, on that coaching staff front, I've got to ask you about Josh McDaniels getting a second crack at being a head coach. I don't know that the Raiders lost games last year. I'm watching if I felt like they lost them because of coaching, but you got a new look and a difference here. What kind of change do you envision from him, if any, as the head coach?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for him, I don't think anybody questions McDaniels as a football mind, and particularly as offensive coordinator. He'll still be the play caller now, even though he's a head coach, but it's more so about how he handles people. I think that was his biggest downfall with the Broncos. And also he made some poor personnel decisions. Now he doesn't have that personnel power, so you don't really have to worry about that. But when it comes to, I think, the interim coach, Rich Bisaccia, who helped got them to the playoffs last year, especially coming off the John Gruden scandal and everything else they had going on off the field, that piece of it, being able to relate to them as humans and having those bonds, that was a big part of what got them into the playoffs last year. And so, if he's still, it's been 13 years, so it's natural just that he's grown and evolved and changed as a person, just as pretty much anyone would. And so he said that's something that he's learned from and doesn't think that's going to be a mistake that he makes again. But that's kind of one of those things you have to see it to believe it. So everything, it's just all smooth sailing in all season. But when the season gets here, maybe they have a setback or have some adversity, does that follow suit to be true? And so I think that's really going to be the key for him in terms of, his offensive scheme. I mean, we've seen what he's done for years with the Patriots. Patrick Graham, he's a rising defensive coordinator that they brought in. And, looking at the roster, it seems like they have the talent they need. And so I think that people part of it and kind of that thing that's kind of hard to see, it doesn't show up on the field or stat sheet necessarily. I think that's what's going to be key moving forward with his tenure.
All right, last thing for you. We could tell game day, it looks pretty wild there in Vegas at Allegiant. In the community, are people into the Raiders year round? Like, what's Vegas taking in this team like?
Yeah, the first year was weird just because the COVID year and they didn't have any fans in the stadium, and so you couldn't really get a sense for how the city was feeling. But I think the second year, particularly once the team started going on a little bit of a run toward the end of the year, you could feel that buzz. It's, a lot of their fans, I would say, are still from California just because it's so close. I mean, you can drive from LA, and it's a quick flight from the Bay Area, so they have a lot of commuting fans. And at their games, a lot of times opposing teams, their fan bases show up pretty strongly, so they have some split crowds sometimes. But I think the city of Las Vegas is starting to take to them and get behind them. Obviously, it's easier when you have a winning team and they're getting superstars like Devontae Adams and they're making all these splashy moves. Like it's a pretty easy thing to get behind, And so I think as long as they continue this upward trajectory and they're winning ways, the fan base is going to come with time.
Well, we look forward to the upcoming season. Certainly the Raiders making a lot of moves. Thank you. That's Tashan Reed, Raiders beat reporter for The Athletic, joining us here. Finished 1 hour. When we come back, more talk about the quarterback, not just Carr, but how about what's going to happen